Why is Appalachia one of the scariest places in the world? It could be because it's sitting on one of the biggest cave systems in the entire planet. Tennessee alone has more than 10,000 known caves. Kentucky has more than 3,000 miles of known cave system and thousands more of unknown cave system. If you guys didn't know that, just watch the movie The Descent and you'll never want to go hiking around those areas on your own ever again. Okay, now not only are these cave systems massive, if you take a list of missing people in the United States that have never been found and you lay it over the maps of the cave systems that we know of, it matches almost perfectly. It literally just looks like it's the same map. These people, are they being taken by something in these caves? Are they accidentally falling into these caves? One thing can be for sure is if you watch the Missing 411, people go missing in these weird, mysterious ways in national parks all the time. But what makes the Appalachia area so special? And I think it might be to do with the limestones, not just the caves, but what's in those cave walls. What are those rocks? They're all limestone. Every area in the world that has tons of limestone also has spikes of myths, legends, folklore, ghost sightings, Bigfoot experiences. It is a weirdly high spike of limestone deposits equal paranormal activity spiking. And a lot of people have a theory on this that's called the stone tape theory. And it's that if you look at the magnetic fields and the different like energies that different rocks and, everything gives off energies and fields and things like that. Limestones might have something to do with like holding in this power somehow. Or if you believe in the stone tape theory, it might be recording things. And that's what ghosts are. Ghosts are just like almost like snapshots in times that these like rocks are essentially storing energy. And then sometimes that energy gets released and we see apparitions or ghosts or, what have you. I'm someone who has been to the Bell Witch farm and gone down into the Bell Witch cave where she supposedly practiced her magic and lived. And guess what that cave is? It's a limestone cave. There are giant limestone rocks sticking up out of the ground all over the Bell plantation. They're all over the place. In fact, part of their house is made with a limestone slab floor. It is truly, if those things have the abilities to house things or to be tapped into power-wise, it would make sense that the Bell Witch wanted to call that place her home. But limestone in general has always been believed to house these supernatural entities or elements. And that's when you get into the Fae and everything else. They talk about in these boulder fields. If you guys want to look at something really creepy, look at how many people go missing in the middle of boulder fields for no reason whatsoever. What's in these rocks? What are in these, big rocky areas that people just disappear off the face of the earth? Not only that, areas that have big limestone deposits also have extreme weather changes for no reason. This goes back to the Missing 411 again. Tons of these people that go missing for no reason, there is a strange weather anomaly that was never predicted, like a pop-up thunderstorm or a pop-up windstorm, or in some extreme cases, it dropped 20 degrees and snowed real fast for a few hours and stopped. And then, it would be one thing if these people succumbed to the elements or got killed in the storm, but we just never find them. They're just gone. It's like that storm literally just took them away. And those storms seem to happen randomly like this over these massive multi-mile long deposits of limestone. So is that a link to another world? One of the most horrifying stories to ever happen on the Appalachian Trail. This is about 6-year-old Dennis Martin, who went missing right next to his family, and the only thing they ever found was his socks and shoes. Okay, so if you have small children, you might not want to watch this one because it can be very triggering, because there is some supernatural elements. There's a possible serial killer involved in this. It is a truly traumatizing story for anyone. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I just could not imagine what this family went through, okay, let alone Dennis Martin, who to this day has never been found. No part of his body has ever been found. So the story happens in Spencefield. It's an area of the Appalachian Trail, specifically in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park in Tennessee. That's in East Tennessee. Okay, Dennis Martin, 6-year-old little boy, his whole family and a family friend, their family was spending the night at this campsite all together, okay? They had spent a couple of days there at this point already. They were spending the weekend there entirely. But during the day, he went missing in broad daylight. They were all playing a game of hide and go seek. And because Dennis was only 6 years old, his dad had been watching, him hide. Like, so anytime he would hide, the dad would watch where he went. And then the other kids would try to find him. And this was like this isn't out in the middle of nowhere. This is on a actual, like, Campgrounds of America, like campground. Like, it's a populated area with very clearly marked trails and mowed down areas. So the dad watches Dennis Martin go behind a tree. And because the dad's not participating in the game, it's just the kids playing hide and go seek in the daylight, okay, in a populated area. So he watches Dennis Martin go behind a tree, and the tree was only 30 to 40 feet from the dad, so not very far. And he watches his son go behind this tree. Now, they're playing hide and go seek for a few minutes, this round of it, and he had seen his son peek out behind the tree multiple times and like giggling and laughing. And then about a minute went by. Now, this is very important because only roughly about a minute passes before one of the kids goes and checks behind that tree. And the dad's like laughing, thinking like, oh, they found little Dennis. And the kid just keeps going and just starts looking behind other trees and other areas. And the dad was very confused because he's like, why didn't he find Dennis? So the dad goes behind the tree and Dennis is gone. He is gone. The last image that dad had of his son was him peeking and giggling behind that tree, because they never found a trace of him besides some socks and shoes that have never truly been confirmed to be Dennis's. They just matched the description of Dennis's shoes and socks that he was wearing, but this was found miles away from the campsite. So they aren't even 100% sure if they found his socks and shoes. Now, here's where it gets wild. I mean, literally within minutes, this is one of the biggest search rescue parties that has ever happened in national park history, because national parks are notorious for not wanting to do like these huge, big group search efforts right away. But this was different. They did. They wanted to do it immediately. 1,400 people searched for this boy that day. And a lot of them were actually called in from the U.S. Army Reserves and even members of the Green Berets. The most professional trackers in the world were in on this search. And no one could find a single trace of this boy. If you watched our other video about the boy that went missing, and then immediately after a freak storm came in that wasn't on the radars, the exact same thing happened now. So hours after he was missing, a freak storm came in, downpoured the rain. It slowed down search efforts. It would obviously erase tons of tracks and evidence and everything else, scents for the dogs to try to find. But that's the other thing. They got the dogs on this almost immediately, and it was like Dennis Martin had never been there at all. They could not find any trace of this boy, and they had other clothes for the dogs to sniff, so a perfect reference. Everybody saw Dennis there with the family. The family was not suspected of foul play at all because everybody was with the dad. They knew that the dad didn't do anything because his wife, his other friends and families, the other children, they were all with the dad the whole time. Everybody has the same exact story. Not a single detail falters. This family was re-interviewed and re-interviewed and re-interviewed for years, and not a single detail has ever changed. Not a single bit of it. Now, if you guys want to look more into this, like I said, it's Dennis Miller. David Plies does a great job of the missing 411, but this case stands out because it is so chilling. A lot of people have suspected, if you can hear about mountain lions grabbing people and running away. There was a famous case where a little girl got bit by a mountain lion and drugged 70 feet within a matter of seconds. But here's the thing. With that case, there was blood. The girl screamed. There was a commotion. There was signs of like a drag trail. There was none of this. And you got to remember, this wasn't like they were in the middle of nowhere in the Appalachian Park. This was right in the middle of a populated campground. I mean, there was people behind Dennis. There was people next to Dennis. They were in the middle of playing hide and go seek. If a mountain lion would have grabbed them, there would have been drag marks. There would have been blood. There would have been signs of a struggle. They would have found him. Okay? Or at least a sign that something had happened, like an attack. There was nothing. Okay? Big cat attacks. I've been attacked before by like one of our bobcats. Even a slight cut from them is extremely bloody. I bled all over the place when he got me in the ear and got me in the chin. There would have been signs. Okay. Next thing is bears. Somebody would have noticed a 350-pound, 6-foot tall bear walking in the middle of their campsite, and then once again he could have screamed. There would have been signs of a struggle. There'd have been things there, right? The dad didn't see him for a window of about a minute to a minute and a half. Here's where it gets supernatural. The only key witness detail that was heavily interviewed is a family witness. Like 4 people witnessed this about a mile away from where he went missing. They all described a hairy, big man and they said he was carrying something over his shoulder, and it looked to be a person that he was carrying over his shoulder. And like, you would think, like, why didn't they report it immediately? They did. They called it in ASAP. And apparently this dude was just trucking through the woods. He was not on the trail. He was trucking through high brush, and he was moving. And they were very scared to say they thought they saw a Bigfoot. If you look at the report, because it's in the police report, they described a large, hairy man, and he was trucking it, they said. Like, he was moving fast. And they said if it wasn't a small person he had over his shoulder, it was a sack of clothes, because they said we've definitely saw clothes. But whatever he was carrying over his shoulder was not moving. Okay? What do you do with that information? And as a dad, knowing your son's missing, and your last images, you saw him peeking up behind a tree, laughing, having a good time. You hear that. And that report came in about 45 minutes to an hour after he was reported missing. And it was only about 1.5 miles away from where he went missing, which would be right on track for somebody walking through deep woods. It would take about that long to maneuver a mile if you're tracking through some heavy, heavy brush. Okay. Once again, though, if somebody abducted him, why did no one see it? Even if it was a person, Bigfoot, I don't care. Let's just call it a person. How did the hell was that? How did no one see him? Okay, get carried away. The dad even talked about how the tree was barely narrow enough for his son to even hide behind. So if it would have been a grown adult, he should have been able to clearly see them. They even did test and reenactment of the dad standing where he was standing and somebody walking up behind this tree, like could have abducted his son. And every time you could see the person in the reenactment, like every time you could see their shoulders, because the tree wasn't big enough to conceal a full-grown man. What do you do with this information? So just remember, the next time you have your kids in the Appalachia region, just be aware. Doesn't matter how relaxed, how peaceful the scenario is, it can turn into a nightmare in literal seconds. Why do so many people go missing in the U.S. National Park system? One theory suggests that the government knows that those are danger zones, and it's called containment theory. When you think about it, the whole United States could have been a national park. So why did the United States government pick those specific zones to designate as the national park system? Now, it's no secret that most of those surround mountains. So why are these people going missing at alarming rates? Per capita, more people go missing in the national park system than any other place in the entire world. So what is containment theory? Containment theory is that there are portals and dimensions that we can't quite see or understand. It's one of the theories on why creatures like Bigfoot are so hard to find, is that they might not even live in our plane of existence, but they just come and go through it every so often. You might have saw our video the other night of Dennis Martin, the 6-year-old little boy who was playing hide and go seek with his family, and as soon as he went around this tree, he disappeared forever. And here we are 40 years later, not a single trace of him has ever been found, even though after he went missing, immediately there was more than 1,400 rescuers looking for him. His dad saw him go behind the tree, and he was just gone. So the theory is that when he went behind that tree, he either somehow went into that tree or into one of these portals that just made him vanish. And a lot of people say this is silly and this is, a joke. You can look up right now that NASA 100% confirms that portals exist. They just don't know how they work or where they work. Now, in their theories, they only exist like in outer space. Why would they not exist here? Okay, so we know most national parks are around mountain ranges. Now, mountain ranges are just essentially pushed up rocks from deep within our earth. And we know, once again, with a scientific fact, that these rocks, these minerals, these quartz, these crystals, they give off electromagnetic fields. So if you're talking about something that's generating electricity, now quartz specifically are really unique, guys. If you did not know it, quartz under pressure emit large enough EMF fields that you can actually just buy a detector from like Ace Hardware, and a quartz will actually register on an EMF field. That's how much energy these things are pushing out when they're put under pressure. Not your ones that are sitting on your counter, but a quartz that's being pushed under pressure. So like a mountain that's squeezing all those minerals together. They're just blasting EMF fields out. Okay, we don't know what that does to us, our surroundings, what kind of phenomenons that could create, and we'd be silly if we acted like we did know. Okay, many people speculate that that's why the Egyptians had their pyramids built out of these different crazy rocks and stuff, is because they knew how to harness these powers of electromagnetic fields. That might have been how they were able to build their pyramids in the first place. So this containment theory suggests that the government knows that, okay, this whole area, these things appear, this whole area, these things appear, so let's make them national parks. That way you can't build on top of them with all these different neighborhoods and Walmarts and structures. So we know people are still going to go there. and they're going to disappear. And that's a risk that it's acceptable to us. We just don't want there to be a whole town built there. And that's the reason why containment theory is that they're trying to limit the amount of people that go through there. And they even say that some of these really high potential portal places is why they limit passes, like Havasu Falls. And, you have to have there's a limited amount of passes sold to these places that you can go there. It makes total complete sense. And if you look back at Theodore Roosevelt, the guy who essentially made the national park system, he believed in tons of supernatural stuff, tons of supernatural stuff. Just go look at some of the stuff he believed in. And he's the one that essentially wrote the boundaries for the national parks. Now, if you look at the national park systems, almost every national park has places that are called Devil's Peak, Devil's Bend, Devil's Clutch, all these different names. And people say, well, that's just superstitious, or, whatever. No, any place with the name devil in it that's been named that since the 1800s or prior is because there was mass deaths or mass disappearances. There's no exception. Okay. Anything that's got a devil in the name, they wrote that back then because back then people spoke different language and different words, but devil is pretty universal. And they wanted people to see on a map, if something was labeled devil, whatever, it wasn't just a slightly dangerous area. It meant avoid this area at all costs. That is a place we should not go. Some bad stuff has happened there. So they would label on these maps devil because a lot of people didn't read, but a lot of people recognize religious words like Jesus, devil, Satan. They recognize those religious words because they'd grown up seeing them. So that's why so many places are Devil's Peak and all this stuff. Pay attention when things are called devil something, and don't be hanging around there by yourself. But back to this portal theory. There's another theory that goes into Dennis Martin with this tree situation. And it's the encased tree theory. And this one gets creepy. This is a rabbit hole for you. The encased tree theory is that the fae, the nature spirits, when they're out there, sometimes they grow fond of people, especially children. And the Irish and Scottish, they'll tell you the fae they're a sucker for kids. They like taking them because they're enthralled with them. A lot of them can't have children of their own, supposedly, and they're jealous of that joy and the energy and their youthfulness because most fae are ancient. So when he went around that tree, it could have been that there was a fae or some kind of nature spirit that just sucked him into that tree and he was gone. The amount of people that have been found in hollowed out trees is kind of astonishing. It's kind of creepy if you want to go down that hole. Loggers have cut down trees before and human remains are in them, and they're like, how did this even get in here? And the theory is that, at some point they got into a hole in the tree and then the tree's hole grew up, or somebody put them in there or whatever over time, or they got stuck in there. There's a million different theories on why this phenomenon has happened so many times in the past. But what remains is sometimes people are just found encased in trees and we don't know why. Okay. Containment theory. It's a great loophole to go down and a rabbit hole to go down. And what's even creepier is when you get into the places that are extreme no light zones. And some people say it's sky pollution. People go out here and stargaze. There are some places where rescuers have to get permission to use electronics. That includes flashlights, their vehicles, or anything. In a life and death situation, you're telling me that the rescuers have to wait to get permission? To me, that sounds like there is something out there that gets disturbed by the lights and they do not want that thing being pissed off. Here's the crazy side of containment theory. Containment theory is also a belief that the government made a deal with these essentially supernatural creatures, we're going to go ahead and get wild, like vampires. And the government essentially said, hey guys, the U.S. National Park System is your hunting ground. You're allowed to hunt there. You can't hunt outside of it. That's where it gets real wild if you want to go down that one too. Just don't take my word for it. It's a wild ride. Here's an Appalachian horror story for you. I gotta warn you, if you're going to be alone tonight or have to go walk outside in the dark for any reason, do not watch this one because this one is a true story. It's just the supernatural element that's up for debate. And it's the story of Casey Hathaway, the 3-year-old boy who went missing from his North Carolina grandparents' home in the Appalachian Mountains. And what just dumbfounds people is how he survived. He was missing for 3 days, and he was in a pajama onesie. This is his picture of when they found him, okay? Now, if you notice, there's no mud on the bottom of his feet. Yet, right after he went missing, it rained heavily. In fact, so much that there was so much mud that the rescuers could not navigate the woods hardly at all. Now, this is where it gets a supernatural twist. After he was found, for 3 days being missing with a few minor scratches, but he was fed and he had been drinking because he was not dehydrated. After he was found, they said, "How did you survive?" And he goes to tell the tale of the fuzzy people that saved him. Not fuzzy like Harry. He says fuzzy like TV static. Okay? He said they kept him company. They talked to him, though he couldn't understand them. They fed him. They watered him. Twig snapping. They fed him. They watered him. They gave him shelter. And he was found just a quarter-mile away from his home after rescuers had essentially given up and assumed that he could only be dead, because while he was missing, it was below zero. During the day when it was above freezing, it was raining. So when it was above freezing, it was raining. So then he would have gotten hypothermia after being soaking wet. And when they found him, he was barely wet at all. Like, it had shown no signs, essentially, that he had been in these elements for 3 days. They didn't think it was possible for a grown man to survive these conditions, let alone a child that was just wearing pajamas. No cold weather gear, no nothing. His family will not recount the story the same way. They say that he said it was a bear. And the first responders are like, no, he said it was a fuzzy person. Fuzzy people took care of him. And they're like, no, he says it's a bear. And to this day, the family recounts the story as he talks about there being a bear. So guess what? During this search, they had hunters, trappers, because they thought, maybe it was an animal. There's mountain lions in that area. There's bears in that area. No bear scat was ever found. No bear dens were ever found. And most importantly, remember how muddy it was? There was no bear footprints found. What's even stranger is Casey, the little boy, his footprints were not found either. He was just found tangled up in a thorn bush a quarter-mile away from where he went missing. The rescuers and his personal family had searched that exact area literally hundreds of times. Like, thousands of people were out here. They combed that area a million times. And he was so close to his home. How they found him is no one saw him. They could just hear him. He was like, "Hey, somebody come get me." And that's where he said the fuzzy people left him, was in this thorn bush. And you can see on that picture, if you go back, I'll put it up here again, you can see his little toe on the onesie is tore up, indicating that, yeah, he was stuck in that thorn bush. But why wasn't he muddy? If you look at photos of the rescuers, they were talking about, it was like knee-deep mud they're sloshing around in. They were talking about it was the worst, sloshiest conditions ever. Yet this little boy that's been out here for 3 days, it looks like somebody's been carrying him the whole time. Kind of like how a big ape would carry their young. Kind of like how a Bigfoot would carry somebody. That's where the conspiracy theories go, is that this was a Bigfoot that abducted him or took care of him when he did wander away, because his grandma describes him as vanishing into thin air. She took her eyes off of him for 2 minutes, boom, he's gone. Now, we know how kids are, but the whole family immediately went searching for him. And even if he was in a full dead sprint, he shouldn't have been able to get that far, right? Now, a lot of people want to say Bigfoot photographs are always fake or they're always blurry. Well, if we listen to Casey Hathaway here, what if Bigfoot are just fuzzy? They're not blurry in the photos because somebody's a bad photographer. What if that's just the way they appear? Because if you look at Native American folklore, they talk about how Bigfoot is not a creature of our plane of existence. He can walk into our realm and out of our realm. So light wouldn't apply to him the same way if he's coming in and out, phasing in and out. And that would also explain why this little boy, he might have not even been in our plane of existence anymore. He might have been back to wherever Bigfoot land is, or what that area, the Appalachian area, call the Fae. If you want to look into the Fae story of this, the theory of this, Fae are often known for luring children. That is one of the big things they talk about with the Fae. They talk about people seeing that, they get their name called, or there's this luring music, or they might even see another child in the woods motioning for them to come here, and it lures them. And the Fae have been described notoriously as being creatures of light, or being fuzzy or blurry, because they're not quite of our realm, so you can't see them the way you would see an actual regular physical object. Who knows? What we do know is that a little boy survived odds that no one should have been able to survive, with relatively no repercussions at all. And he himself talks about the fuzzy people, okay? And the doctors all agree somebody had to give him food and water. So then that goes back to a lot of people saying, what if he was abducted? What if this or that? Where's the footprints? The rescuer's footprints could be seen everywhere. But somehow this boy, it was like he just pooped into the thorn bush. There is no tracks for him leading to the thorn bush. There's only the tracks leading away from the thorn bush after he was found and discovered. Almost like he was dropped from the sky, or Dropped from a tree, once again, the way a great ape would drop you out of a tree. So the next time you're walking in the Appalachian woods, just remember, most likely you're not walking alone.